to this episode of the Women in Technology Spotlight Expert Talks. I'm stoked to have with me today Pat Muoio, who is a partner at Sinewave. Hi, Pat. How are you today?
Good, thank you. How are you doing? Glad to be here.
I'm really happy to have you here. Let's kick it off with a question about yourself. Who are you?
So I am currently, as you mentioned, a general partner at Sinewave Ventures, where we invest in early stage technology, largely in the areas of computing, analytics, and cybersecurity. Before that, I worked for my first career at the U.S. intelligence community, which was where I first became a technologist, and those areas, I was exposed to those areas of work. Before that, my degree work was all in philosophy, so I'm actually a liberal arts person to begin with, and I think that's interesting for people who are pursuing tech careers to see that there's many paths into this very exciting world. And then I'm a mother of one daughter. I was a single parent while I was raising her while I was working at the government, and living in New York and having a fine time with it.
Great. And I love that you are, one of those career switches, and the interesting thing is also, I've met so many women who are in tech now who initially did something completely different. So even I myself, I have a PhD in chemistry. I did not study computer science. And this seems to be a topic that's quite common with women, that that at some point we realized that something about technology is interesting and we switch. What was your point?
So I've always been interested in solving problems, and began to realize that technology was a very good way to do that. Technology can change the way we work, the way we think. If you want to recreate the world in a pragmatic way, I think working with technology is a very excellent way to achieve that. I'm not a political person or an activist or anything like that, but there are things that could be better, and I hope to make them so.
Yeah, you touched on a really important topic that's also very close to my heart. I always feel that we need more women in tech. And actually, by the way, today was Girls' Day in Vienna, which means that we invite young women to come into our companies and show them what we do. And so this was one of the things I was also thinking about, looking at these young faces, that those will be the ones who will be changing things in society with tech, hopefully. What was your career path? You said you were a liberal arts major, but what happened?
So I originally was studying philosophy with the idea I'd be a professor. Ended up getting somewhat disillusioned with the prospect of academics and was looking around for jobs. This was in the early 80s, before computer science was really its own separate discipline. So I had options that probably would be less available to liberal arts people now that the education has become much more departmentalized. But anyhow, I had this option with the agency to take on this job, which was an analytic role. And it seemed exciting, and seemed like the logic and the thinking that I had learned in my liberal arts background would be relevant there. And so I took that job, thinking it was, something I'd try out, not knowing it was the beginning of 30 years of a very happy and diverse career.
Mm-hmm.
So in that career, I started as a crypto analyst, which was breaking codes, and which is something few people get the chance to do, and which is a very exciting type of work to do. Moved on to a bunch of other analytic things. And obviously, when you're working in some of these deep analysis, you can't do it by hand, right? Computing is the only way into figuring out these very complex systems, dealing with large sets of data, and so on. So I learned to program on my own, and began to use programming as an analytic tool, and then became interested in computing in itself as a discipline and a way of working and a way of improving the way we did our jobs. Moved on to consider, signals, do cybersecurity, so that sort of the content of the analytic work I was doing kind of changed over time, but there was still always this background in analytics and figuring things out. Became a researcher, became a leader of research groups, and began to realize that the government really needed to partner better with commercial sector and with academics to a lesser extent. And that it was very hard to do that from inside the government. The processes were very complicated. It was very hard for startups and other innovative people to figure out how to interact, understand the language, to have patience with the processes or whatever. So as I was looking around to leave the government, I met my partner, Yini Suiza, who's the founding partner of Sinewave. And he was talking about this vision of setting up a venture firm that would invest in commercial companies with an eye to helping them get government customers to find their way into the government. I thought that was an excellent way to try to solve this problem from the other direction. So joined into that, and that's where I am now.
Oh, that's such an interesting and actually quite a colorful career, and I'm totally in awe, actually. So so you're now in a venture capital firm, and you manage that you mentioned that some of the firms that you finance are cybersecurity companies. Cybersecurity for me is a big topic. I work in the cybersecurity space now. And I was wondering, because you have this long history, you are working for the DoD and being part of this field. What do you feel has changed in cybersecurity?
So it's been a long journey, and I think we have to recognize cybersecurity is still a relatively young field. Initially, I think the cybersecurity efforts were all at the large perimeter of the system, all attack-based, all looking at things from what's coming at me, from looking at them from the outside in, and doing whack-a-mole on individual attack types and trying to knock them each down one by one. I think that was always a losing proposition, and I think it's becoming apparent in the industry that it is. And there's starting to be more technology that I would call inward focus. You look at your own system, how is it set up? What kinds of policies can be enforced by your own network controls? How can you manage identities in a way that's fine-grained enough to not have to let everybody see everything, but just have people able to collaborate on their work with the data that they need, but not have to open up every single data store to everyone to enable that kind of collaboration. So I think the change is generally in a positive direction towards these more systemic and internally based thing. And I actually have a hope or a vision that really managing cybersecurity will become a matter of how you manage your system and not an external concern that you add on after you've set up your network and your computing system and so on and so forth. I'm seeing small steps towards that, and maybe that's because I'm eagerly looking for them, but hopefully that's the direction that will continue to move forward.
So I think one thing you're talking about is, like this zero trust. And the other thing you're talking about is that you actually design security into your infrastructure instead of just bolting it on afterwards. So are you seeing any interesting, companies in that space, any new developments where you feel this could be something that makes sense?
Yes, so I'm seeing a number of companies. Zero trust is an area that there are starting to be quite a few companies in. And some of them are quite profound. They're not just at the access to the system level, but they're one of the companies we're invested in called, it's called Operand, is working at the application layer so that at each step you can verify that the person or the piece of code or the device is allowed to do that action, right? So it's not just you verify that Pat is allowed to be on this machine, but you verify as I'm running an application that this is an application I'm allowed to run. It's not now trying to escalate privilege or do something it's not designed to do in its correctly operating state, and that at the application layer, we are making sure that only the things we mean to let be done are being done. Similar company work at the network layer to do, again, verify at each decision point that this is indeed something that could connect to something else. I think computing has gotten so fast that you can do these checks at multiple points in an execution or multiple points on a system without delaying the application in a way that would have been the case if we tried these technologies even 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's actually an interesting point because our systems are getting faster and have more resources. And now we need these resources to actually make sure that we are safe. And this just reminded me of one thing I was asked today. We were talking about encryption, and one of these young girls, I think she was maybe 12 or 13, asked me, but why? Because we showed them, how you can actually sniff the password if it's not encrypted. And she asked, but why would anyone ever send something unencrypted? And that reminded me how, the technology has changed and we now live in this completely different world where, sending stuff just unencrypted doesn't make any sense and you would never do it. But it also brings me to the question, if it's not that we are, building on technology that is from a time that is gone and it's actually not really fit for what we're doing or trying to do with this technology now.
I think that's actually a very good point. I think we are building a lot of Band-Aids on something that's just broken, but also that's something that we've moved beyond. We don't need to fix that old thing. We can do these new things because the type of computation, the computing infrastructure has changed to the extent that it has. And you see a lot of very, in my mind, inelegant or clunky solutions that happen because people are still trying to start, from the perimeter or the attacker's point of view or whatever, and force it to work in a way that's just not likely to be successful. You're working from the point of least information and trying to do the job where it's the hardest, rather than starting from the root and working it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing I was thinking about, or we are all thinking about really, is we are seeing this large talent gap, so we can't find any people to work in, not only in cybersecurity, but the whole field is barren. So in terms of threats, which are not, like technology, what do you see, coming?
Well, so I want to address the talent gap question first, and then get into possible other social threats. One of the reasons I think there is a talent gap is because we have started to define the criteria for these jobs too specifically and to check the box, too much certification days, too much, that there's a whole inventory of things you have to have accomplished to get this job. And I'm not sure the inventory is well chosen. And I'm not sure it's an indicator of good success in that job. And this is where I put on my liberal arts hat and talk about the way that the thing that needs to be assessed in hiring people, particularly in areas like cybersecurity, is precisely analytic skills. It is thinking, it is critical thinking. And saying, oh, did you take the SANS course or do you have a CISSP certification does not necessarily ensure that you are a good critical thinker or that you can perform in some of these roles. As technology is advancing, the roles in these fields are all they're moving up a level in the analytic stack. And they're not just, sifting through one alert after another to find the alert that looks like it's one you should worry about. They become higher level thinking. And I think that the skills gap could be, the dynamics of at least could change. I don't know whether it could be lessened if you start thinking of other types of backgrounds as relevant to those roles. In terms of some of the other threats in the cybersecurity world, I've become very interested in the problem of manipulating data and people messing with data or providing misinformation, providing deep fakes, providing edited kinds of pictures or whatever to cause false conclusions, false decisions as a result, and as the process goes on. I think this data manipulation, data provenance problem is one that has been under-resourced to date. And I think particularly now as AI becomes much more powerful, we need to make sure that we have ways of checking that the data we're feeding into these systems is legit, and it has had bias removed, and it's reflective of the authorship is assured and it hasn't been doctored and all of those kinds of things. And I think that's something that's going to become an increasing problem over time. So I think disinformation as input into algorithms, but just disinformation in general. I think there's all sorts of, particularly in the United States, there's a lot of distrust among people. There's a lot of people taking very strong positions on bad information and making decisions that, in the case of COVID, for many, it was life or death by not getting a vaccine because it's big government or whatever. I don't know what the issue is with that, but so I think disinformation and that is a big issue. And the sort of companion to that is obviously privacy. Yes, giving up your data gets you some good things. I like that my shopping basket, they say, oh, you might like this. And the more accurate they are, the more I like it. But I think we at some point have to think about those trades and make a decision, not perhaps for each piece of data, but certainly for each type of data, whether it's worth it to you to give that up. And I think systems need to start putting the controls in place that enable you to easily make those decisions and enforce them.
Yeah, you touched on 3 things that are absolutely important. I mean, one thing with the skill gap, I totally agree. I think we're making it worse by looking for skills that we don't necessarily need. I mean, you are an example, and a lot of women I know are an example that you can learn anything you want if you're interested, and it doesn't really matter what is written on your degree, So, and then the whole topic of fake information, fake pictures, which has kind of accelerated, in my opinion, in the last couple of weeks now that we have, everyone seems to be accessing, things like Mind Journey. We all saw the picture of the Pope and all these things. And of course, that was funny, but you can do things with these tools that weren't possible, not accessible to the common man. And one of the things I also talked about with someone this week was, all these scam phishing mails, you could always tell that it was a phishing mail just by the grammar, but this is going away because you can just use one of those tools to write a mail in whatever language and it sounds like it's written by a human, So it's just accelerating the problem of, being able to discern what's real and what's not real and what's true and what's not true. And I wonder how we are going to address this. And I think, and that's my opinion, I think it's all based in education, really,
And again, this is when I get back to critical thinking as the skill that people need to have. And you're right, it is going to get harder. It was always easy to tell that this was, something that's just not good English, and people would not write it that way. But now that's less true. And with the information that is easily gleaned about you online, you can put little details in there that can make a dedicated phishing message very, very compelling. And I think that is something that we're going to have solutions for. In terms of technical solutions, I actually think there isn't one to that problem, and that the problem is to have controls elsewhere in the system that if you are phished, you don't get any further than the initial password in. And recognize phishing as a fact of life, but don't let it cause harm into your system. I hate to punt on anything like that, but I think it's just too hard a language problem to solve phishing itself now that it's getting so complex.
Absolutely. I agree. This will always or will remain something that we cannot solve, as phishing will not go away. It would just get worse. It's now smishing and voice phishing and all these things. And I think you just mentioned something that I really forgot to touch on, and that is the combination of the lack of privacy and these technologies. Because what you said was it's easy to get some personal detail about you and then include that. So this is actually a topic I haven't really thought. Thank you for this, because this is something I haven't really thought about a lot.
Yeah. Now's the time to be a fisher for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for these insights. But coming back to your journey, or maybe not your journey, but when you look back on your career, I mean, obviously, just like I do, you enjoy working in the space. But if you think of young women starting out today, what would you recommend they do? You know, what would your life tips be for a good career in tech?
I think critical to a good career in tech is maintaining an interest in continuing to learn. You know, a lot of times people come out of school and the kind of learning you do there is not continuous, right? You learn the material, a body of material to pass an exam or whatever. But always being inquisitive and looking to the broader aspects of what you're working on, I think is a very, very important aspect of a good technologist. Again, I'll get to my critical thinking drama and beat on that because that's the key thing. I think, though, more concrete advice about working in the technical workplace. What I have found to be the biggest obstacle or barrier, I don't know if it's the biggest problem that women face, is that they tend to present information differently than men. They do not present, if there's something that has a nuance or you know, it's not 100% certain, they will present that. They will not confidently say, this is it, when they don't feel they're entitled to that. And that's, I think, correct and noble, but it's also not what men do. And so it's easy to look in the male eye as diffident or as unsure when really you're not. So having the confidence of your position, the fact you did your homework, you know what you're talking about, is very important to make evident in your conversations in the workplace. And the flip side of that is the workplace, and people are not always going to agree with you. You're not always going to be right. And being able to speak in a conversation that's perhaps adversarial, but not hostile, without getting upset or without feeling attacked, and recognizing that learning and advancements often come from this kind of conversational conflict is another thing that I think could help women in the workplace. So yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that.
That's very insightful. I love that you talked about this. I mean, I often get, the usual be bold, lifelong learning. You mentioned that, but, just focusing on the differences in communication, if you work in a male-dominated field, and understanding how men communicate and how you have to communicate if you want to make a career. I think that's one of the most important things you can learn early on to progress fast.
Yeah, because I think you get the labels very early on, and then it's very hard to get rid of them.
And I think what also happens is when you are in the system and then you don't progress because obviously you do things differently and you don't know what is happening, you might get frustrated. A lot of women leave. We also see that, right? That women tend to leave the space, and we don't want that. We want them to stay, and we want them to be successful because we need them here. You talked about, the importance of having people in tech too, because it's important for society, and in my opinion, especially having a diverse community is so important. You talked about bias in data and all that, and same is true for all development. So yeah, thank you for mentioning communication and understanding the differences in communication between men and women. This has been very insightful. I had a great time talking to you, Pat. It's been lovely. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you. I also enjoyed the conversation and really appreciate the time. Thanks a lot.